On August 8, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein sat in a cell at Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan and signed an updated version of his will, and he left $50 million to his lawyer, $25 million to his accountant, $10 million to the children of a Norwegian diplomat, and $10 million to Ghislaine Maxwell, and $50 million to Caribbean islands, a Manhattan townhouse, a Paris apartment, a Palm Beach mansion, a New Mexico ranch, a 33-carat diamond ring, and 48 loose diamonds to his last girlfriend, A. Endel. Days later he was dead, and his cellmate, a man named Efron Reyes, had begged him not to do it, and Epstein told him not to worry. And the next day, Reyes was transferred out in a routine move, and the day after that, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead and alone, and then something interesting happened with the body. A jail supervisor told the FBI that staff took boxes and sheets and built what looked like a human body, and then they loaded it into a white van, one labeled as belonging to the medical examiner's office, and the media followed the van. But Epstein's actual body that was loaded into a separate black vehicle, and it left, quote, unnoticed, and that's in the files. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's from an FBI interview memo dated August 16, 2019, released by the United States Department of Justice on January 30, 2026. And along with that, they also released over 3.5 million pages of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein, along with 180,000 audio images and 2,000 videos. And it is by Volume 1 of the largest single document releases in American history. And I need you to understand something before we really get into this. This video is not about whether or not you believe in conspiracy theories, okay? This is not about speculation. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what I think happened. I'm going to just read what's in the files. I'm going to read quotes, okay? Directly from FBI interview memos, from emails between Epstein and some of the most powerful people on the planet, from a draft federal indictment that was written up ready to go and then just never filed. I'm going to show you what the United States government knew when they knew it, and what they chose to do about it, or what not to do about it. You know. And Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche went on CNN and said it out loud. In July, the Department of Justice said that we had reviewed the files, the quote Epst files, and there was nothing in there that allowed us to prosecute anybody. And that's what's important for the American people. And the victims want to be made whole. And so we want that. The Attorney General wants that more than anything. But that doesn't mean we can just create evidence, or that we can just kind of come up with a case that isn't there. And then he said, essentially, we've shown our work. The whole world can look at it now and tell us if we got it wrong. So that's what we're going to do today. See what they got wrong, 'cause this is insane. They're just going to put a big trigger warning here. We're talking about a lot of very sensitive issues. So if you have any triggers to any of that or any sensitivity to that, please feel free to skip this video. But what we are talking about is extremely important, because it is happening in our world, and I feel like we need to talk about it. And a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today have been glazed over, and I'm going to really get into them. So without further ado, let's get into this video. But before we talk about the names, and we're going to get to the names, okay, you need to understand what Jeffrey Epstein actually built. And if you want to get really in depth with who he was and everything, you can go to my other videos about him, especially my first one. I'm not going to go into like who he is and how he was built and all that kind of stuff. We're going to kind of glaze over that and get right into all the new stuff. But there is a tendency to talk about this like it was a social scandal, like some rich creep knew some famous people and things just got out of hand, you know, and that framing lets everybody kind of off the hook. I think we're far past that now, but you know, that's kind of how it's been talked about in the past. But this wasn't a social circle. This was an operation. It had infrastructure. It had employees. It had logistics. It had recruitment pipelines. The United States government had the details in its hands for almost 20 years and did absolutely nothing about them. And buried in the 3.5 million pages is a 56-page draft federal indictment prepared by prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida sometime in the mid-2000s. 60 counts not just against Epstein and 3 co-conspirators described as personal assistants who were, quote, employed by Epstein, and their names are still redacted even now in 2026. So, 3.5 million pages released and the government still won't tell you who these 3 people are. and the charges include trafficking of children, conspiracy, enticement of a minor, and traveling with intent to engage in illicit conduct. And all 4 defendants are described as having conspired to, and I'm reading this exactly as it's written, persuade, induce, and entice individuals who had not attained the age of 18 years to engage in prostitution, unquote. And 19 girls are named, all under Jane Doe pseudonyms, and some who were 14 years old. But here is how this all worked. The co-conspirators would call the girls and arrange travel to Epstein's Palm Beach estate, and Epstein would use them and pay them. And in at least one instance, a girl was also made to perform acts with one of the unnamed co-defendants for Epstein's benefit, and the girls were paid several hundred per visit, and then they were encouraged to recruit their friends, bring another girl, get another payment. A pyramid scheme for abuse. So it was around $200 for a visit, $200 for a recruit. And when one girl hinted at telling someone, the indictment says Epstein told her that, quote, if she reported to anyone what had occurred, bad things could happen to her. She was 14 years old and the indictment was never filed, and a blank space where a grand jury for person should have signed. Just disgusting. And why? Why? There's also a separate prosecution memo addressed directly to then U.S. Attorney Alexander Otosta, and it recommended presenting a sealed indictment to a grand jury on May 15, 2007, and arresting Epstein shortly after. And the memo describes Epstein as direct, quote, an extremely high flight risk, and from information we have received a continued danger to the community based upon his continued enticement of underage girls. So, they weren't describing something that happened once. They were telling their boss, this man is still doing it right now, we need to arrest him. Instead, Aosta cut a deal, and Epstein pleaded guilty to a state charge, not a federal, of soliciting from someone under 18. So, not sex trafficking, not rape, not conspiracy, soliciting prostitution. As if a 14-year-old girl was a willing participant in a business transaction. Are you kidding me? So, he got his 18 months, served 13 with work release, meaning he could leave jail during the day, and the Department of Justice later reviewed the deal and concluded Aosta had used their exact words, poor judgment, not professional misconduct, poor judgment. Hosta went on to become Donald Trump's Secretary of Labor. Okay, we're connecting dots here. And he resigned in 2019 when all of this started coming back around. And inside the house among the FBI 302s is a 2007 interview with a household employee at the Palm Beach estate, and his name is redacted, but the agents wrote down everything. And his daily duties included fanning out $100 bills on a table next to Epstein's bed, placing a gun between the mattresses, cleaning up after what Epstein called massages, wiping down vibrators, throwing out tissues, laundering towels, and disposing of condoms. And he told agents that Epstein once had him buy flowers and deliver them to a student at Royal Palm Beach High School to commemorate her performance in a school play. And Epstein directed him to rent a car for the girl described in FBI notes only as UF, an unidentified female. And he recalled another girl who looked very young. And when the FBI asked him point blank, "Do you believe some of the girls were under 18?" the employee nodded. And the agents noted he was, quote, affirming that he believed some of the girls were under the age of 18. And the FBI also noted that Epstein enjoyed taking the girls out for ice cream at a local parlor, and that he let some of them even drive his cars. And the employees were even sent to take them shopping at local malls. So ice cream, car rides, shopping trips, cash on a nightstand, and a gun between the mattresses and flowers delivered to a high school. Just textbook grooming, right? Just a predator operating in broad daylight with a full staff. And the FBI had this interview in 2007, okay? 18 years before these files were released. And the Palm Beach Police Department identified 27 girls and women between the ages of 14 and 23 who went to that house for massage services. And they were typically paid $200 per visit. And they were, quote, encouraged to find other girls to bring with them also for pay. And Galilean Maxwell did a video on her as well. Didn't just recruit, as we've talked about before. And according to the FBI's 302, she ran the logistics of the entire operation. And she brought women in under the guise of professional massages or dance sessions, always the entry point. So you think you're getting a legitimate job, and then the massages become something else, as we know. And Maxwell and Epst arranged domestic and international travel for the victims, and they provided logistical support for passports, and they used modeling agencies as fronts to recruit foreign nationals. And one FBI report describes Maxwell as, quote, dangerous figure who directed victims' clothing and social interactions to suit high-profile men. You imagine a woman looking at a child and dressing them up and presenting them to these predators. Like what? I hate this woman. So much. I hate this. Well, I hate everybody involved in this, but I don't know. I'm going to get very mad throughout this whole video. Hope you know that. And the modeling agent, Jean-Luc Bernal, was identified in the FBI records as an intermediate who recruited young girls through modeling fronts. And Bernal was later arrested in France on charges of minors and trafficking minors for exploitation. And as we've said before, he was found dead in his French jail cell before trial ruled a you-know-what, just like Epstein convenience. But the control didn't stop when the girls got out, because multiple survivors told the FBI that after leaving Epstein's orbit, they were contacted by people claiming to represent his interests, people who pressured them to cooperate with federal investigators. But before we get into who these girls were seeing, or who they were forced to see, I want you to hear what this looked like for the girls inside this machine. And the first was a 2021 FBI interview. And a woman told agents she met Epstein when she was around 14. And she confided at him that her childhood had been, her word, shitty. And she told him she had been as a child. And Epstein told her he was sorry about that. And then he started having her come to his house for massages, and she described them as uncomfortable because both of them were undressed, and he touched her in ways she didn't want to be touched, and she tried to stop him. And the FBI notes say she, quote, felt degraded when she went to Epstein's home and felt taken advantage of, but she also said she felt happy because she had a bunch of money, unquote. She was 14 and she'd already been abused once, and she told a grown man about this abuse, and then he just took advantage of her vulnerability, and then got paid. Like, what's a 14-year-old supposed to think? And the second was a woman who was approached outside of a New York dance studio at 17 years old. And she thought she was being offered dance-based fitness sessions for a wealthy client. And the sessions became massages, of course, and the massages became sexual encounters. And it just continued for years. And Epstein paid her, tried to control her career, and encouraged her to bring in her new friends. And both women described the same system, the same gradual escalation, the same isolation, the same financial control, the same machine. So that is in all what we have. Emails, FBI interviews, a draft indictment that was ready to go. An employee testimony about the gun and the cash and the vibrators and the ice cream and the flowers sent to the high school. Just a mechanized system of abuse with employees, logistics and recruitment pipeline that treated teenage girls like a renewable resource and new prosecutions. Sorry, quick pause. I look different right now. I'm recording this on a different day. I might look different in different parts of this video just because more information came up and I researched a little more and wanted to add it to the video. So, if you see me in a different outfit, that's why. But let's get back into it. So then we have the diary, and among the files is a 32-page journal kept by one of Epstein's victims, and she was 16 or 17 years old, and her attorney submitted it to the Department of Justice as evidence, and every page is stamped confidential in attorney's eyes only, and the entries describe a girl living under total control. Everything in her life, where she lived, where she went to school, what she did was dictated by Epstein. But what the diary documents goes beyond control, and it documents something much, much worse. Because according to the diary, Epstein fathered a child with this girl around 2002, and she gave birth to a baby girl, and the baby was taken from her. And she describes the birth, quote, a shot and those rod-like things had a hook, and so much pain, Ghislaine said, to push all the pain away. And she also writes, quote, I saw beautiful fingers, this tiny head and body in the doctor's hands. It reached its tiny arm, and had a tiny foot. And then she was given 10 to 15 minutes to hold and feed her daughter before they took her. And she writes, quote, she is mine, I want her back. Distraught, and a 20-week pregnancy scan is pasted into the diary, and next to it she wrote, quote, she is gone and she won't be coming back. And in another entry she writes about a second pregnancy, saying, quote, tomorrow is the halfway ultrasound for Jeffrey. This one stuck after they took the first baby who survived, and the early miscarriage. I think it was called I no longer feel like a person but a vessel, unquote. Like, this is like talk about Handmaid's Tale, and the rich taking babies. Like every conspiracy theory, the worst kinds we ever thought of are real. Like, according to this diary anyway. Allegedly, you know. But I'm just going to go ahead and choose to believe the victims like I always have. But I hope you do too, because I just wouldn't put it past them to take kids and sell them. We'll get to some even worse stuff that they could be doing. It's sickening. And she goes on to say, quote, will they take this one too? Who has the first one? Where did Ghislaine go? She is never around. I am not old or mature enough, or even in a place to have a baby that I would be responsible for. Will I ever be free? And in a separate entry she describes a miscarriage, saying, quote, so, it came out in the toilet, and I didn't know what to do, so I just flushed the tiny little fetus. You have made me numb and I hate you for this. I hope I never see you again. I am not your personal incubator. Where is the baby and where is Ghislaine? And she also writes about why Epstein chose her, specifically saying, quote, why me? It makes no sense. Why my hair and eye color? She compares his obsession with creating what he called a superior gene pool to Nazi ideology. And she claims she wasn't the only one and that Epstein fathered children with several victims. And this tracks with earlier reporting because in 2019, the New York Times revealed that Epstein had told scientists and associates about his ambition to seed the human race with his DNA by impregnating women at his vast New Mexico ranch. And at the time, it was unclear whether he'd actually done it. So, we have a diary submitted as evidence by attorneys and included in the DOJ's own release that says he did, and that a teenage girl was impregnated, gave birth, and her baby was taken away and impregnated again, miscarried, and wrote about all of this in a journal that sat in government files while no one was prosecuted. And a separate email in the files from September 2011 addressed to Epstein congratulates him on welcoming a baby boy. But Epstein never publicly acknowledged having any children because he would have to admit that he did horrendous things to children. But this machine didn't run in a vacuum. It existed inside a social ecosystem of the most powerful people in the world. People who visited, people who emailed, people who flew in on planes and stayed on the island and took the gifts and looked the other way. And now, thanks to these 3.5 million pages, we know exactly who they are and what they said. But before I get into them, I want to be clear about something for legal reasons. You know, being in these files does not automatically or legally mean someone committed a crime. Some of these people may genuinely not have known. Some of these people may have had legitimate professional relationships with Epstein. I'm not a court. I'm not a prosecutor. But some of these connections are so deep and so sustained and so damning that I didn't know stops being an explanation and starts being an insult to your intelligence. But I'm just saying for legal reasons, these are all I mean. I'm reading what's in them, all right? And then you can just, it's up for interpretation. I guess they're not guilty as of yet, you know. So with that, let's start with Donald Trump. Now Donald Trump appears in the Epstein files thousands of times, not hundreds, thousands. And he is one of the most frequently referenced individuals in this entire release. And now does that mean he's guilty of something? Not necessarily, okay? And some of those references are from news clippings, some third-party mentions. But the substance of references, the ones that actually matter, paint a picture that is deeply uncomfortable, especially for a sitting president of the United States of America. So here's what's in the files. So there's an FBI 302, an interview memo from 2021, and a victim tells the FBI that Ghislaine Maxwell, quote, presented her to Donald Trump at a party. And she described the introduction as being, quote, similar to a CV, unquote, like a resume. And she said Maxwell suggested to Trump that she was, quote, available. And the victim told the FBI that nothing happened and Trump did not act on the introduction, but the fact that Maxwell was allegedly presenting girls to him like items on a menu is a detail that sits with me kind of wrong, you know. And there's an email in the files from 2011 in exchange between Epstein and Maxwell about Virginia Guppry, who we've talked about on this channel many times when covering Jeffrey Epstein. And she is the most prominent Epstein survivor as of thus far, who was beginning to speak publicly before her untimely death. That is extremely suspicious. And in that email, the person identified as G-Max, Maxwell's known alias, writes, quote, I thought you said not to involve Donald. Involve him in what? What? Donald, also stupid name now that I'm just thinking about it right now. Donald the sorry if your name's Donald, but involved in a conversation, in a legal strategy, in something else entirely. The email doesn't say, but the sentence exists and it's in the files. And Epstein's house manager testified that Maxwell approached a girl at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's own property, for recruitment purposes. And the files also contain an FBI spreadsheet from August 2025 that compiled 12 or more unverified allegations about Trump drawn from tips submitted to the Bureau. and these include allegations about so-called calendar girl auctions and a golf course trafficking ring. And I want to stress these are unverified FBI tips. I'm not saying they're verified. Just got to cover my tracks. The FBI itself noted they were unverified, but they were compiled and they were in the files. And there's also a 1994 civil lawsuit from a Jane Doe alleging that Trump is her at an Epstein party when she was 13 years old. And I did cover this in my last video, and the case was filed, withdrawn, refiled, and ultimately dropped before trial. And Trump has denied all allegations related to Epstein as a whole, as we know. But here's the thing. You can look at all of that and say, well, nothing was proven. And that is true, that's true. But the reason nothing was proven is that nobody tried to prove it. And that's kind of the whole point, and that brings me to Bill Clinton, another president. What the is wrong with this country? But he appears in the files in connection with at least 16 flights on Epstein's private plane. 16 that are documented. By the way, in a 2016 deposition when Epstein was asked questions about Clinton, he invoked the Fifth Amendment to every single question, which is his right to not comment on it. And there's an email from October of 2009 where socialite Peggy Siegel writes that Bill Clinton and Jeff Bezos were there at a party hosted by Ghislaine Maxwell. And the files show an ongoing social relationship between the Clinton orbit and Epstein's world that persisted well beyond what was publicly acknowledged. And in January of 2026, the U.S. House of Representatives held Bill and Hillary Clinton in contempt for failing to comply with subpoenas related to the Epstein investigation, and depositions were scheduled for late February 2026. And as of the time I am reading this, those depositions have not yet taken place, and Clinton has denied any knowledge of Epstein's crimes. You're lying in my opinion. Okay, in my opinion. And now the next name is a name that a lot of people outside the UK might not know, and that is Peter Mandelson. Probably saying that wrong. I don't really give a he's a former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, a former European Commissioner, one of the architects of Tony Blair's new Labour movement, and one of the most powerful political operatives in modern British history. But Peter appears in the Epstein files more than 5,000 times. 5,000 euro. And Epstein's 2003 birthday book lists Mandelson as, quote, my best pal. I hate that. This man I know is a monster and I'm allowed to say that. The files contain evidence that Peter leaked UK tax plans to Epstein. So confident government information shared with a convicted offender. And Peter's partner received £10,000 from Epstein to fund osteopathy course. And there's a photo in the files released to the public of Peter posing in what has been described as underwear. And here's what happened after the files dropped. On February 1, 2026, Peter resigned from the Labour Party, and on February 3rd, he resigned from the House of Lords. And on the same day, February 3rd, the Metropolitan Police in London launched an active criminal investigation into Peter in connection with the Epstein files. And as of right now, Peter is the only person in the world facing a criminal investigation as a direct result of the 2026 document released. The only one. And it gets so much worse because we have Prince Andrew next, and several hundred mentions are in the files and 3 photographs that are going to haunt the British monarchy for a generation. And in the photos, which were released as part of the document dump, Andrew is seen kneeling on all fours over a woman lying on the floor, and the woman's face is redacted. But Andrew's is not, thankfully. And he's staring directly into the camera, and in one image he appears to be touching her abdomen, and there are 3 photos in the sequence all undated, and the emails are worse, because in August of 2010 Epstein emails someone likely Maxwell and offers to introduce Andrew to a, quote, 26-year-old Russian cleavier, beautiful, trustworthy. And in September of 2010, Andrew sends a message suggesting a dinner at that they will, quote, need/private time. But Virginia Gupp Frey's FBI 302 from 2013 describes how she was recruited from Mar-a-Lago, flown to London, and alleges with Andrew, and he was stripped of all royal titles and military affiliations in October of 2025, and the UK Prime Minister has publicly urged him to cooperate with investigators, and as of February 2026, he has not done so, and I don't know if he ever will have to. I don't know. And then there's Howard Lutnick. He is the current United States Secretary of Commerce. And he was confirmed to that position in February 2025. And during his confirmation hearing he told Congress that he had cut off all contact with Jeffrey Epstein in 2005 after learning about the allegations. And he called the relationship a mistake and said it was over, but the files said otherwise. And emails from 2011 and 2012, years after Levick claims to have ended contact, show ongoing communication between Lutnick and Epstein, drinks, visits, social plans. In November of 2012, Levick's wife sent an email referencing a visit to Epstein's island on a quote 188 FT yacht. And in November 2015, a full decade after Levick said he cut ties, he invited Epstein to a Hillary Clinton fundraiser that Levick was hosting. Oh, the Clintons are back as well. Pieces of, so, either the files are fabricated and the DOJ has given no indication that they are, or the current Secretary of Commerce lied to Congress about the nature and duration of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein at this point. A tale as old assing time. And he has not been asked to resign, by the way. Enodo. He's not been investigated, by the way. And he also hasn't been subpoenaed, by the way. And then there's Steve Bannon. Now, Steve Bannon's presence in the files is not primarily about sexual misconduct. It's about something almost more unsettling, and that is the sheer cynicism of the people who run your government, because the files contain hundreds of text messages between Bannon and Epstein, many from the period when Bannon was serving as chief strategist to President Trump. And in those texts, Bannon says things about Trump that are illuminating because he calls Trump quote-unquote out of gas. And he writes, quote, stable genius bringing himself down. And he brags about manipulating Trump into policy decisions, saying, quote, dude, I just got him to pull the trigger on $400 billion in tariffs on China. Unquote, and puppet on a strings. Oh my God. And he texts Epstein that he, quote, can't seem like I'm running Trump's nose in his own incompetence, unquote. And there's also nearly 2 hours of recorded video of Bannon being interviewed by Epstein. And the context and content of the interview haven't been fully described in reporting, but the fact that it exists raises an obvious question. Why was Steve Bannon sitting for a 2-hour on-camera interview with Jeffrey Epstein? And Epst also gave Bannon a $1,500 Hermes watch as a gift. Just all kinds of blackmail going on. That's what I'm going to assume. And then there's Larry Summers, former Secretary of the Treasury and former president of Harvard University. Yeah. And former board member of OpenAI and one of the most influential economists of the last 30 years. And in May 2017, Summers emailed Epstein about Donald Trump and asked, quote, how guilty is Donald? And Epstein responded, your world does not understand how dumb he really is. This man runs the country, okay. And in July of 2017, Summers wrote to Epstein, quote, I think your friend is mentally ill, unquote. And these are private conversations between 2 men about a sitting president. And so that alone is very notable. But the deeper issue is the relationship itself, because Summers maintained contact with Epstein well after his 2008 conviction and well after it was publicly known what Epstein had done. And since the files were released, Summers has taken a leave of absence from Harvard and stepped down from the OpenAI board. But no investigation, no subpoenas, no arrest, nothing. And then we have Crown Princess Mette Marit of Norway, who is one of the biggest royals in this list. And the files contain more than 1,000 mentions of Mette Marit. I'm not saying that right. I don't care. More than 100 emails exchanged between her and Epstein between 2011 and 2014, and she called him quote-unquote sweetheart and soft-hearted, and you tickle my brain. This was after the allegations already came out about him, by the way. And Epstein responded to her calling her quote twisted with a winky face, not a typical royalty, unquote. And in one exchange Epstein wrote, quote, Paris good for adultery, Scandy's better wife material, unquote. And in another he asked about, quote, woe naked women carrying surfboard for my 15-year-old son's wallpaper, AF. So, the Crown Princess of Norway was in regular communication with a convicted offender who was making comments about naked women in the context of her 15-year-old son. And that communication continued for years. And the files also show that she stayed for 4 days at Epstein's Palm Beach estate in 2013. The same house where the FBI documented the messages, the vibrators, the $100 bills on the nightstands, etc. And the house the victims called the villa. And she stayed there for 4 days. And since the files dropped, she has issued a public apology. Oh, that makes up for it. And there are growing calls in Norway for her to renounce her right to become queen. And the Norwegian public is not satisfied. And now I want to spend a moment on Kathy Rumler because she's not a household name by any means, but her story captures something about how Epstein operated within elite circles. So Rumler was the White House counsel under President Obama, and she later became the chief legal officer at Goldman Sachs, and she is one of the most connected legal minds in Washington. So in December of 2015, she emailed Epstein and called him, quote, "wonderful Jeffrey. I adore him," and said having Epstein in her life was like having another older brother. Ado. The files show that Epstein booked and paid for a first-class trip to Europe for her. And in October 2014, when she was considering whether to accept a nomination for U.S. Attorney General, she sent Epstein a draft of her statement declining the position and asked for his, quote, "thoughts." And she sent a draft statement about the Attorney General nomination to Jeffrey Epstein for review. But here's the kicker. Epstein's estate was asserted attorney-client privilege over hundreds of their emails, meaning they claim Rumler was acting as Epstein's lawyer during at least some of this correspondence. Which, if true, means the former White House counsel and future Goldman Sachs chief legal officer was providing legal services to a convicted child offender and trafficker while publicly maintaining no meaningful relationship with him, quote-unquote. That's disturbing, but all of these people have the same thing. They have ongoing year-long relationships with this man. And it's not like a quick little encounter. That's why I'm going over these specific people, because it's not just a one-off, it is years of evidence. And most of them are still in power and have had no repercussions as of right now. But we haven't even gotten to the billionaires, so let's get into that. Starting with numero uno, Elon Musk, because this one is a masterclass in getting caught in a lie. So, in September of 2025, months before the big document release, Elon Musk posted on X, his platform, the following statement, quote, "Epstein tried to get me to go to his island and I refused. All caps. Refused. Definitive. End of story. Nice, Elon." But here's what the emails have to say. Because on November 25, 2012, Epstein emails Musk and asks how many people he'll be bringing for, quote, the heli to Ireland. That's the helicopter to Little St. James, Epstein's private island. And Musk responds, quote, "Probably just Tula and me." Kula Riley, which was his wife at the time. And then Musk asks a follow-up question, and I need you to hear this one clearly. Quote, "What day/night will be the wildest party on your island?" That's a direct quote from Elon Musk to Jeffrey Epstein about his island in 2012. And on Christmas Day of the same year, Musk emails again and he writes, he's been, quote, "working to the edge of his sanity this year, and so once my kids head home after Christmas, I really want to hit the party scene in St. Bart's or elsewhere and let loose," unquote. And he adds that a peaceful island experience is, quote, "the opposite of what I'm looking for. Guy wants to get wild. I can't even imagine what he wants to do." That's all alleged and up in the air. But in December of 2013, another email comes up and Musk writes, "We'll be in the BVI St. Bart's area over the holidays. Is there a good time to visit?" And Epst replies, quote, "Always space for you." And then the follow-up, quote, "I will come and get you." So, did Musk actually go to the island? The files don't confirm it definitively, but the emails confirm beyond any reasonable doubt that Musk was not only invited, he was actively trying to coordinate a visit to the wildest party of the year. I can't. They're all liars. Everyone's a liar. And no one asked Musk about this under oath. No one has subpoenaed him, and no one has done anything at all. And no one probably will. But then we come to Bill Gates, and he's probably the biggest one as of right now because it's a complicated picture and it's nasty. And it just got more complicated because this week both Bill and his ex-wife Melinda have now spoken publicly about what's in the files, and what they're saying paints very different pictures. And I'm just going to say I believe his wife, I believe his ex-wife. But let me start with what's in the documents. So, in Epstein's email account, there are draft messages from July 2013, unsent, written by Epstein to himself, and that read like a man. Documenting leverage blackmail, if you will, even though the FBI won't acknowledge that because I don't know. But one is styled as a resignation letter from the Gates Foundation, and the other is addressed to Dear Bill, and both are full of typos, stream of consciousness, and it's very just raw. And the content is explosive because Epstein claims that in his role as Gates, his word's right hand, he had been asked to do things ranging from the morally inappropriate to the ethically unsound. He gets very specific, and he writes about, quote, helping Bill to get drugs in order to deal with consequences of with Russian girls, unquote, girls, not women, girls. And about, quote, facilitating his illicit terrorists with married women, unquote, and about being asked to provide Adderall. And then there's this line. Epstein writes, quote, to add insult to injury, you then implore me to please delete the emails regarding your STD, your request that I provide you antibiotics that you can surreptitiously give to Melinda in the description of your penis. So just let that sink in. Epstein is claiming in an email to himself that Bill Gates contracted an STD, came to Epstein for help getting antibiotics, and wanted to secretly give those antibiotics to his wife so she wouldn't find out that he was sleeping with Russian girls and other married women. So, we don't know if these emails were actually ever sent to Bill. That is unclear. They were drafts sent from Epstein's account back to his own account. So the question is if these are true and two people just answered it differently. So on February 4th, Bill Gates broke his silence, and in an interview with 9 News Australia, he said, quote, apparently Jeffrey wrote an email to himself. That email was never sent. The email is false. And he said, I don't know what his thinking was there. Was he trying to attack me in some way? And then every minute I spent with him, I regret, and I apologize that I did that. Umquata. I don't believe you. Yeah, I don't believe you. And he said he met Epstein in 2011, had dinners with him over 3 years to discuss getting rich people to donate to global health and called it a dead end. And he said those exact words, and he said, quote, I never went to the island. I never met any women. And he called himself foolish and said he was one of many people who regret ever knowing him. So that's his story, that the emails are false and Epstein was a liar and it was all about philanthropy dinners. End of story. But the day before Gates went on Australian television, his ex-wife went on NPR and she told a very different story. And Melinda French Gates sat down with NPR's Wildcard podcast and said her reaction to seeing Bill's name in the files was one of, quote, sad, just unbelievable sadness. And she said the details, quote, bring back memories of some very, very painful times in my marriage. And I am so happy to be away from all the muck that was there. And then she said something that if your Bill Gates should keep you up at night. And she said, quote, whatever questions remain there, I can't even begin to know all of it. Those questions are for those people and for even my ex-husband. They need to answer to those things, not me. So, she did not defend him. She didn't echo his denial. She said, he needs to answer for it. And she called it muck. And she pointedly said, not me. As in, this is his problem now. And then she turned it back to the victims and she said, no girl should ever be put in the situation that they were put in by Epstein and whatever was going on with all of the various people around him. I mean, it's beyond heartbreaking, right? I remember being those ages those girls were. I remember my daughters being those ages, right? So, for me it's personally hard whenever those details come up, right? Because, brings back memories of some very, very painful times in my marriage, but I have moved on from that, and she previously describes Epstein as abhorrent and evil personified. She said she met him once and had nightmares, and her husband had dinners with him for 3 years. So, the day after Melinda's interview aired, Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace wrote to the chairman of the House Oversight Committee asking him to subpoena Bill Gates. And she wrote, quote, I have questions for Bill Gates about Epstein, so here's where we are. Epst wrote draft emails claiming he helped Gates cover up an STD, gets drugs, arrange encounters with women. And Gates says it's all false, and his ex-wife won't back him up and says he needs to answer for it. And sitting Congresswoman wants him under oath. And the bigger question, the one nobody wants to ask out loud, is this: if Epstein was keeping this kind of information about Bill Gates, one of the richest people in the world, as leverage, who else was he doing that to? Because that's what this looks like. Not just a social network, a blackmail operation with receipts. So, next on our list is Steve Tisch, and he is one of the co-owners of the New York Giants and a major Hollywood producer. And he's not as well known as Musk or Gates, but his emails with Epstein are some of the most revealing in the entire release because they show you in real time exactly how Epstein operated as a social middleman for women. So, in 2013, Tisch emailed Epstein about a woman he'd met at Epstein's house and called her a very sweet girl. And then he asked Epstein a question that tells you everything. He says, quote, pro or civilian, unquote. Pro or civilian. Was this woman a worker or not? That's the question you ask about someone you met at Jeffrey Epstein's house, just casually over email. And Epstein described the woman as, quote, civilian but Russian and rarely tells the full truth. But funk does that mean? And in another exchange from June 2013, Epstein emails Tish saying, "You should be in New York this week, have new present," unquote. And Tish asks, "Is mom present in NYC?" And Epstein later describes the woman he's going to introduce to Tish to as Tahitan, speaks mostly French, exotic, unquote. And Tish asks if she's a working girl, and Epstein responds, "Never, just gives me all kinds of Ike." So, he's describing women like items on a menu. And Tish is asking about pricing. And Tish's public response was, quote, "We had a brief association where we exchanged emails about adult women," unquote. And he says he never took Epstein up on any invitations and never went to the island, so maybe that is true. But the emails are right there, and the language in them is the language of a man who understood exactly what Epstein was offering and was comfortable enough to ask clarifying questions. And next up, we have Sir Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin Group, billionaire, philanthropist, and owner of his own Caribbean island. So, in 2013, Branson emailed Epstein an invitation to visit his island and wrote, quote, "Anytime you're in the area, we'd love to see you as long as you bring your herm." And for those of you who don't know, I had to look it up personally. A her is a domestic space that is reserved for the women of the house in a Muslim family. And like the slang version is a group of women associated with one man, often humorously or facetiously, a significant group of people surrounding someone or a specific anime or manga genre where a protagonist is pursued by multiple love interests. So whatever way you're looking at it, it's a group of women essentially. So he said this to a then convicted offender in 2013, 5 years after Epstein's first conviction. And Branson wasn't just socializing, he was advising. And in a separate exchange, Branson counseled Epstein on how to rehabilitate his public image. And his suggestion was to get Bill Gates to go on record saying Epstein had been a brilliant advisor and had more than learned your lesson and have done nothing that is against the law since. So all these are just all evil people just trying to figure out what can we do to make it seem like we're not evil pieces of demon. But Virgin Group put out a statement saying that the word harem referred to 3 adult women from Epstein's team and that Branson was just repeating a term Epstein had used. Okay, sure. All right, whatever helps you sleep at night. And they also said Branson eventually declined a charitable donation from Epstein and chose not to meet with him again after his team uncovered serious allegations. Okay, sure, but here's my problem with that. In 2013, when Branson wrote that email, Epstein's serious allegations weren't hidden. They were public, and they had been for years. And Epstein had already been convicted and he had already served time. So the entire world knew what he was. And Richard Branson was emailing him about her and offering PR advice. So, I see you, Richard. And next up we have Peter Iea. Now, he's a celebrity longevity doctor and he's been on every podcast pretty much. Not mine though, thank God. And he's a CBS News medical contributor, and he wrote a best-selling book about living longer. And he's got millions of followers who trust him with their health, and his emails with Epstein are something else. Because in February 19, 2016, late at night, AIR writes to Epstein, and I'm going to read this verbatim as per usual. Quote, "Is indeed low carb. Still awaiting results on gluten content though," unquote. Endo. You know, could just be a disgusting email. They like 2 guys, 2 at least, one predator and one potential one just talking and gabbing. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're talking about a younger person. But if you're talking Epstein at this point, I don't think you're a good person, you know. Not to mention this was in 2016 now, so he knows who Jeffrey is and what he does. And in another email to Epstein's assistant, IAA says he goes into withdrawal if he doesn't see Epstein. IAA. In June 2015, under the subject line, got a fresh shipment. This is where it gets bad. This is where I stop giving him any sort of benefit of the doubt. AIA wrote, quote, "The biggest problem with becoming friends with you, the life you lead is so outrageous, and yet I can't tell a soul." What's so outrageous, Peter? You know, what can't you tell anyone? That makes you look extremely suspicious. And AIA posted an apology on X after the files dropped, and he said the emails were embarrassing. He clarified that fresh shipment referred to metformin, a diabetes medication for my own use. No, I don't believe you. I just don't believe you. And he did not explain the mail because that one she can't really unexplain that. And he did not explain what about Epstein's life was so outrageous. And he did not explain why it had to be a secret either. So, looking at you too, Peter. And that brings us to our next person, Peggy Siegel. And she is a New York socialite and film publicist. And she's the kind of person most people have never heard of, but who exists at the center of a very specific world. The world where money, media, and access intersect. And her emails with Epstein are a window into how casually grotesque that world can be. Because in 2009, while planning a trip to Kenya, Siegel wrote to Epstein, quote, "Bring a little baby back for you or 2 boys or girls. Somadonna, quota." I have no words, but in context, this could be a tasteless joke about celebrity adoption. Sure, a reference to Madonna's adoption of children from Malawi. That's the most charitable reading for you, but you're making that joke to Jeffrey Epstein in 2009. And the joke is about acquiring children, boys or girls. And in the same email chain, Siegel boasted about plans to photograph herself in mud huts and pretend she had crashed the Winter White House and posed with Obama's relatives. Who is this woman? And she also wrote a New Year's Eve recap from St. Bart's name-dropping Paul McCartney, George Lucas, Harvey Weinstein, and Robert Downey Jr. And in a separate 2009 email, after leaving a party at Ghislaine Maxwell's house, Siegel casually dropped, quote, "Bill Clinton and Jeff Bezos were there." So, this is the ecosystem. This is what it looks like. A publicist making baby jokes with a pedophile while name-dropping presidents and billionaires at parties hosted by his co-conspirator. And everyone just went like this. What are you going to do? So that brings us to our next piece of Woody Allen. Now, Woody Allen appears in the Epstein files more than 7,000 times, and he had over 100 documented meetings with Epstein between 2014 and 2019. And he took at least 9 flights on Epstein's planes. And this is after Epstein's conviction, after the plea deal, after the entire world knew. And in a 2012 email, someone joking with Epstein about a trip to Paris asked if they're heading to, and I quote, "Le Peta convention I want to throw up." And Allen's spokesperson had said he never had business meetings with Epstein and that his wife, Suni, was always present. Sununi, by the way, is Woody Allen's adopted daughter, who he allegedly did things to when she was a child, allegedly, and now he's married to her. So, I already don't like Woody Allen. Let's just keep that. I don't care if I can't say that anybody's guilty here, but to have around 100 red meetings in 5 years is not a casual acquaintance, and you can't convince me otherwise. Woody, you piece of. But here's where I want to pause on, because it's not just the names, it's the language in these emails. It's the tone. It's how comfortable these people were. And nobody in these emails sounds shocked, and nobody sounds confused. And nobody writes back and says, "What do you mean by that?" Or, "I don't want any part of this." They write back and ask follow-up questions. They ask if the girl is pro or civilian. They ask about the wildest party. They describe women by nationality and attractiveness like they're ordering off a menu. And they joke about conventions, and they write boys or girls to a convicted offender planning a trip to Africa. And the word that keeps coming up over and over in Epstein's own emails, more than 400 times, by the way, is whoops. And someone writes that they're giving Epstein permission to kill someone who lied to them both. Then he learns about the alleged allegations of a young woman, and he writes, whoops. And he hears that Mary Kennedy has died, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s second wife, who later died by somebody not doing it themselves, if you know what I mean. And he writes, whoops. And he learns that Sultan Binshan's mother-in-law has died also. Whoops. 400 times the same word in response to death, violence, and essay. Like a man who had been doing terrible things so long that the only emotional register he had left was a smirk. And then are the emails to the victims themselves. Because the files don't just show us how Epstein talked to the powerful, they show us how he talked to girls. And in August 2009, Epstein wrote to a woman, quote, "It would be nice if when I ask you to rub my head or my feet, you actually did it for more than 10 minutes without thinking about something else." Unquote. And in another exchange he writes, quote, "I love the torture video," unquote. And he advised a woman to take antibiotics because she had many in just a few weeks. But this is what's happening behind the private emails. While billionaires were asking about the wildest parties and socialites were joking about bringing back babies from Kenya, this is the other side of those conversations. This is what the machine was doing to real people. And here's the thing that ties all of this together is that every single person I just mentioned, every one of them is walking free today with no charges, no subpoenas, and no investigations. And most of them haven't even been asked a question under oath. And the emails are right there in the files on a government website for anyone to read. It's almost like they're rubbing it in our faces. And I don't even know what to think about it because the system saw all of this and it documented all of it, and then it was decided it wasn't enough to do anything. Well, can't do anything about it. Arrest them. I don't know. Investigate. I don't know. So, Congress passed a law demanding transparency and the president signed it and the DOJ was ordered to release the files, and they did eventually. But the way they did it caused a second wave of harm, not to the powerful men in those emails, but to the victims themselves. The system failed these women and girls for 20 years. And then it was finally forced to show its work, and it failed them again. In the timeline, November 18, 2025, the House passes the Epstein Files Transparency Act 427-1. Juan nu vote. Clay Higgins of Louisiana, I'm staring at you. Bombastic side eye. But the Senate passes it unanimously and Trump signs it November 19th and the law gives the DOJ 30 days. So December 19th arrives and the DOJ puts out a batch, and it's a joke. As we know, over 500 pages of solid black rectangles and entire documents unreadable just by partisan fury, and then it gets absurd. Because within hours people on social media discover the redaction technique is broken and the black bars on the digital PDFs aren't permanent. You could copy and paste the hidden text into a Word document and read it. So, the redactions were cosmetic, not functional, and the flaw was traced to a 2021 court filing from the Virgin Islands Attorney General's office that the DOJ had incorporated without reprocessing. And among the content recovered from behind those broken redactions was an unverified FBI tip alleging Trump had witnessed the killing and disposal of an infant born to a 13-year-old trafficking victim. Unverified, by the way. So the FBI documented it without corroborating it, but the DOJ had specifically redacted it, and their own incompetence made it public anyway. And by January 5th, less than 1% of the files had been released. And the DOJ then announced it had discovered an additional 1 million documents it hadn't accounted for. Oh wow, where did they go? Did they fall under the desk? In January 30th, 42 days past the legal deadline, the big batch drops. 3 million pages, 180,000 Daro images, and 2,000 Daro. And Deputy AG Todd Blanche declares full compliance, except the DOJ admitted in its own letters to Congress that it identified approximately 6 million pages responsive to the act, but it released 3 million. So that's half, and the other half was withheld citing attorney-client privilege, grand jury secrecy, and child material, and duplicates, and just unrelated material. And Representative Rona went public with what was still missing. FBI 302 victim interview statements, the full draft indictment, and prosecution memo from 2007, and hundreds of thousands of emails from Epstein's computers, grand jury materials from the SDNY case. And he wrote, quote, "Failing to release these files only shields the powerful individuals who were involved and hurts the public's trust in our institutions. That's gone. There's no trust, by the way. You can't break it anymore. So, but all of that is bureaucratic failure. What happened to the victims is betrayal, because when the DOJ released those 3 million pages, they published on a public government website accessible to anyone in the world, dozens of unredacted nude photographs of women and girls victimized by Epstein. And the Wall Street Journal found that 43 of the 47 victim names were left completely unredacted, and at least one woman who had never previously been identified as an Epstein victim was publicly outed for the first time by the DOJ's own release. And attorneys representing more than 200 survivors filed an emergency motion, calling it, quote, "the single most egregious violation of victim privacy in one day in United States history." And Todd Blanche defended the process, and redaction errors affected about 0.0.0.0.0.0.1%, unquote, of materials, he said. But 3 million pages at even 0.1% is 3,000 pages of exposed victim information. And publishing even one nude photo of one survivor on a government website is incalculable damage. And Annie Farmer, who testified against Epstein and helped convict Ghislaine Maxwell, said the failures were really disgusting. Then she said something that cuts to the heart of all of it. Quote, "There's just no explanation for how it could have been done so poorly. They've had victims' names for a very long time. I don't think this is just about rushing to get this information out. And Danielle Bensky, another survivor, discovered that confidential conversations she'd had with the FBI investigators had been included in the document dump without her knowledge and without her consent. And a group of Epstein accusers released a joint statement saying, quote, "As survivors, we should never be the ones named, scrutinized, and re-traumatized while Epstein's enablers continue to benefit from secrecy." Yeah, of course. Like, the fact that they even had to say that is so incredibly sad. But that whole sentence is the whole story. The co-conspirators got blackout identities. 3 people named in a 60-count indictment are still anonymous somehow. But the girls who got abused, their names were published on a government website because nobody at the DOJ bothered to check. Like, what is this world? And the public, as I've said, were not fooled. You know, a CNN poll from January 2026 found that 6% of Americans were satisfied with what the government released. And knowing the government and their up polls, I'm assuming it's 0%. Maybe it's like 0.06%. But even the fact that it's 6% is crazy. But it's universal. And 49% said they were dissatisfied. Anundo. 2/3 said they believe the government is deliberately withholding information. I'm going to say 100%. I'm going to say your polls are rigged and it's 100% of us are not satisfied at all, and we're disgusted, and we need to just rinse this all out. Rinse all you guys out. Get some new people in, or I don't even know. I don't even know. Got to be careful with what I say right now. But a separate economist/YahooGov poll found 49% believe Trump is attempting to cover up Epstein's crimes. What? Of course. Again, it's 100% at this point. What are these polls? I didn't get asked. Who asked me? Nobody. Hey, let's put a poll up. How many of you guys, I bet 100% of you guys would say that you're displeased and you think Trump's trying to cover up? I'm pretty sure. And a Reuters poll from December 2025 found only 23% approved of Trump's handling of the case. I'm sure it's very different now. And when Blanche says there was nothing in there that allowed us to prosecute anybody, the public is looking at the same files and arriving at a very different conclusion. It's 6%. That's how much faith the American public has in this process. And I don't even believe that number. I think it's 0, personally. And also, here's the thing about releasing 3 and 12 million pages. Some are FBI interview records with credible witnesses, and some are emails from Epstein's servers, and some are tips that random members of the public called into the FBI over 20 years. Documented, filed, and apparently never investigated. Shocking, I know. And all of it has been dumped into the same release with no clear labeling, which is so intentional, you know. It allows all of us to create our own narrative, and to mix up things, and to make it seem like we're crazy for thinking these things. But, whatever. In a press release accompanying the January 30th dump, quote, "This production may include fake or falsely submitted images, documents, or videos, as everything that was sent to the FBI was the public was included in the production that is responsive to the act." Unquote. So, every anonymous tip and every fabricated document someone mailed to the Bureau mixed in with real evidence, and the DOJ did not distinguish between them. That izing, disgusting, and horrible practice. So we're looking at all of these images and emails and everything, and they're like, some of them could be fake, by the way, just covering our own asses. I have so many things to say, but I can't say it because you know what, you know. But let's talk about the yacht allegations. So, there's a document referencing a party on a yacht, and the allegations are extreme claims about people eating feces from intestines. Allegations against George Bush. One, an account accusing Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush of doing horrible things to a boy on a yacht with Epstein in 2000. And these have been shared millions of times. And here's what the files tell us about the source. The person described the event as, quote, "recovered repressed memories," unquote, that surfaced after beginning therapy in 2016. And FBI agents noted that individual was, quote, "emotionally unbalanced, though not intoxicated," unquote. And the FBI documented the claims and, according to the release, did not expand the investigation eating feces out of intestines. And yes, it's an allegation. It is not 100%. Why would that not be investigated? But they didn't, because they come from a single source whose credibility the FBI itself flagged. So, there is a meaningful difference between this and the draft indictment and the employee testimony or the Musk emails. One is verified documentary evidence, and the other is a tip the FBI didn't find credible enough to pursue. But just going to say it, at this point it's horrible. But I wouldn't be shocked. I'm not shocked at I don't know. I just fully think these people are evil, like the epitome of evil. And next we have Gabriela Rico Jimenez. So in 2009, a 21-year-old Mexican model named Gabriela Rico Jimenez was filmed outside the Fiesta Inn Hotel in Monterrey, Mexico. And visibly hysterical, screaming, "They ate humans. They smell like human flesh." She allegedly just left a private party at the hotel, and according to available accounts, she was never seen again, and police described it as a mental breakdown. But after the Epstein files dropped in January 2026, her video went massively viral, and social media users connected her claims to the release, suggesting the documents contain evidence of cannibalism among global elites. But here is what the reporting actually shows. No substantiated evidence in the official DOJ release directly confirms her claims, and major news organizations like CNN, PBS, BBC, AP have not reported a verified connection between the files and her 2009 incident. And the connection is being made by social media users, not by investigators who reviewed the documents. The video is real, and her fear may have been genuine, but sharing unverified claims as fact gives the powerful people in these files an escape hatch, so we need to be careful. Am I saying that they've never done anything like that? I don't know. Again, I don't know what to think anymore, but every time someone posts something unverified as proven, it gives Lutnick and Musk and everyone else a reason to wave their hand and say, "See, it's all internet nonsense." But the emails are real, and the indictment is real, and the victim testimony is real. So, don't hand these people an out. You know, we can speculate all we want, but don't post things that aren't proven as proven. You know, it could be like this may have happened, but it really does give them a leg up. It's so wrong. It's so wrong. It's so wrong that we have to police ourselves to keep the government in check, you know. And next, we have the fake wife in the email. So, some things in the file sound like conspiracy theories, but are actually documented. And in May 2016, a woman named Margarita writes to Epstein asking, quote, "Do you still need a fake wife?" Unquote. She's found a Russian woman who is, quote, Jewish and trustworthy, unquote, and looking for a job, and that email is real. And in March 15, 2018, an email with the subject line, "He has passed away." Epstein writes about Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, speculating that Robert had threatened Israel's intelligence agency, Mossad, after allegedly working as an informal agent spying on the UK, the US, and the Soviet Union. And Robert Maxwell's body was found floating off the Canary Islands in 1991. And his death has been the subject of conspiracy theories for over 30 years. And when the real documents contain emails about fake wives and Mossad threats, the line between conspiracy theory and documented correspondence gets very blurry and just makes me think it's real, you know. But here's what I am genuinely I'm losing sleep over all of this. It's very hard to report and document without being very emotional. So, I'm trying my best, and if I don't seem to upset enough, it's because I'm trying to hold it together to make it through this video. But what really keeps me up is what is in the files, but it's also what's not. You know, the DOJ identified 6 million pages and released 3 million. Half of everything is still withheld. And based on what lawmakers have said publicly, the missing pages include what I stated before: victim interview statements, the actual records from FBI conversations with Epstein's victims, many still withheld, and the full unredacted draft indictment and prosecution memo from the 2007 Florida investigation, and hundreds of thousands of emails from Epstein's personal computers. So, we've only seen little tiny fragments, and the rest remains unreleased. Grand jury materials from the SDNY case, the federal case that was active when Epstein died, is under seal. And who are these 3 co-conspirators? The draft indictment? 60 counts, 19 victims, 4 defendants. We know one was Epstein, and the other 3 are still redacted and not arrested or investigated. What is going on? And the first person to contact the FBI about Epstein was Maria Farmer in September of 1996. And she reported Child S, and she gave them information. And the FBI documented the call, and then nothing for a decade. And Epstein wasn't arrested until 2006, 10 years after Maria Farmer told the FBI what he was doing. And 27 girls identified in Palm Beach, and then 19 Jane Does in the indictment. So, hundreds, possibly thousands of victims across multiple countries. And the clock started in 1996 when a woman did the right thing and was ignored. And Annie Farmer, Maria's sister, called it weaponized incompetence, which is exactly what it is. The system didn't fail to catch Jeffrey. It just chose not to for 30 years because they needed to, I don't know, get their ducks in a row and make sure all of them weren't seen as the predators that they are. But why did Aosta kill the indictment? And why did the FBI sit on Farmer's tip for 10 years? And why are 3 co-conspirators still unnamed? And why are 3 million pages withheld? And why has no one new been charged? And why did the DOJ publish victims' nude photos while protecting their identities? I don't have the answers, but I know who does. And they're not talking. They're actively ignoring and brushing it off. But I started this video by telling you what Todd Blanche said on February 1st. In July, the Department of Justice said that we had reviewed the files, the quote Epstein files, and there was nothing in there that allowed us to prosecute anybody, and that's what's important for the American people. And the victims want to be made whole. And so we want that. The Attorney General wants that more than anything. But that doesn't mean we can just create evidence or that we can just kind of, come up with a case that isn't there. I've looked, you've looked, or you've heard what at least a tiny % of it is. So did they get it wrong? And I think the fake polls, I'm going to guess the fake polls answer it. Don't even go in their favor. And I'm pretty sure they control those. So that's pretty bad. I think in the Transparency Act passed 427 to 1. So this is not a left and right issue. It is across every demographic. So let's make that very clear. There's no sides to this. They are all evil. All of them. Everyone's complicit in my opinion. You know, it's not even my opinion. I mean, you got the Clintons, you have the Obama's administration, you have Trump, it's like you can't look anywhere and somebody's connected to somebody, and nobody said anything. The system is protecting the powerful at the expense of the people they harmed. So, this is not a system that failed. That is a system that worked exactly as designed because the system doesn't prosecute the powerful. Prosecutes the expendable and calls it justice and just looks at us and expects us to be okay with that. We're not monsters like you. We actually want something to be done. But I want to end with something from Epstein's prison psychiatric evaluation, and it's in the files saying, quote, his identity appeared to be based on his wealth, power, and association with other high-profile individuals. And that's not just Epstein. That's the system that protected him. And a world where wealth is insulation, where knowing the right people means the law doesn't not apply to you. Even when the FBI has a 60-count indictment with your name on it and 3.5 million pages, and nobody goes to jail. And whether that's enough is up to you. It's up to you because they're not doing anything about it. And I, like many other people, are calling them out. So do something. That's it.